Hello, everyone. Welcome to my paper, Fear of a Black Consciousness, Embracing My Whimsical Nerdcore. And it's really an auto-ethnographic discussion of how I navigate the world as a Black autistic man in the UK. So through family, friends, interests, and my professional experiences as well. This was presented at the University of Nottingham's recent Black Men's Gender and Sexualities Conference as well. So today's paper originates from various discussions with my friends in education who have been drip feeding me encouragement to speak. I've had quite a few conversations with my friend, health and social care scholar Dr. Naomi Alomele and criminologist Dr. Dominique Walker. Beyond my family, mainly my dad, my personal and professional life is largely absent of men, let alone black men, and it wasn't always this way, but it gradually got this way through my teenage years and then my 20s when I got interested in social justice work, or doing it more overtly. Partly when I started using poetry to promote Black history and things around racism and things like that as well. In 2020, it became apparent that my most meaningful relationships and connections were mainly with women and queer people. Naomi told me that my challenges in connecting with men came as I couldn't be my authentic self with them. And so often men are performing what we might call a manufactured masculinity. Being my authentic self, then, I can't count the number of times I've been kicked out of the quote unquote boys club for showing traits coded as feminine, like being emotional, vulnerable, or sensitive. And so, even amongst my male cousins when I was growing up, I remember comments and criticisms as they didn't resonate with how I was. This doesn't mean they were bad people, but it really reflects a patriarchal system. So I did not feel welcome around guys, and I was drawn to women with higher emotional openness, and the nature of the conversation was always just a bit more complex as well. At 12, I started writing poetry. I love going to the theatre, stories, literature, nature, flowers, and things that required a bit more, I guess, emotional intuitiveness. I was seen as too white by my black cousins, and the boys I did basketball with on a Saturday, who were both black and white, um, also saw me as too feminine due to my interests. And today, men also look at me sideways when they find out that I've done work on Jane Austen that tends to attract a women's audience. I've also presented at conferences in Disney studies, which is also quite feminine coded. And if there are men, they're normally white men. So to articulate my experience of this liminal zone of blackness and maleness, or between that, I use this term apparitional blackness to think of how I am a ghost between 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 for black men who are seen as even slightly alternative to the norm. Although I was raised with both influences from my mum's side of the family who are from Grenada and dad's family who are from Jamaica. I lived in Northampton with my parents, influenced by mum's family, which also means the legacy influences have also been predominantly black women. And living among mum's family, there weren't many men growing up, and this dates back to Grenada as well because my granddad is one of 11 children with 8 sisters. So, other than my dad as a child, I grew up with my grandmother, my aunties, my great aunties, and the women and the women friends of the family as well. What sociologists, authors Tracy Reynolds and Patricia Hill Collins call the other mothers. The men who were around were physically there, but I could not really go to them with emotional issues. And so my male elders were, I guess, spiritually absent. And they didn't really talk unless it was something deemed quote unquote practical. So to some degree, the Caribbean households in which I grew up centered women and children. And in Northamptonshire, just like anywhere else in Britain that became home to Caribbean communities in the 50s and the 60s onwards, Caribbean women as community mothers organised childcare central to the making of Black motherhood. So as a child, I was privy to these island women just talking, chatting, big people talk about their lives that took me into the intimate terror of what today we call hyper invisibility. At the crossroads of anti-blackness and misogyny, their discussions of paradoxical surveillance and being ignored by black men and white people speaks to the trajectory of my work about global patriarchal whiteness and the death grip of what university professor Moya Bailey later coined as misogynoir, anti-black misogyny experienced by black women and girls. So being raised by island women, then it was clear to see the ways black men benefited or benefit from the patriarchy and continue to invest in it, including women's unfree labour, upholding things like family get-togethers as well. So from the very earliest days of my childhood, being socialised by women, I struggled to belong with boys. And although I remember having incidents with misogyny as a young person, notably when I was a teenager trying to fit in, this was not a natural behaviour. So at 16 at college, I did not know I was autistic then, but it makes sense that I mimicked the other boys, not because I believed their misogyny, but because I wanted to belong somewhere, even if that belonging was manufactured. Social work scholar Dr. Brené Brown says the opposite of belonging is fitting in. So at college, the first course I did was a BTEC level 2 in public services, and I'd left school without the proper grades. BTEC level 2 qualifications in the UK on paper were the equivalent of 5 GCSEs, and I also retook English and maths. So here I fell into a very hyper masculine crowd or a group of young, predominantly white boys who wanted to be police officers, marines, and so forth. And in my heart, I didn't want to join the police or the public services, but it was the easiest course that would get me to where I wanted to go at the time. So I did the assignments. So I learned the military phonetic alphabet. I did the policing fitness tests, but I had also lost myself, my identity, and really my beliefs in the process of doing that. I had to unlearn a lot of stuff. So I was also in spaces around men, including at the barbers, family, and also sports teams at the time, namely in cricket. And at that time, it took a lot of effort to resist male hegemony, the groupthink, and be myself in a world that doesn't allow men and boys to just be. But at college, I was critiqued when it came out that I played cricket, which was seen as a soft man sport, or someone also that was doing poetry. My masculinity then to many of these boys who were being hardened by public services came with markers attached. So my resistance to patriarchal groupthink started to slip when I left that course and eventually went on to do A-levels in English language, English literature, film studies, and communication and culture. And the types of questions asked on communication and culture, a course that was sort of a mix between sociology, media, and cultural studies, brought out those biases more and how I've been indoctrinated. The public services environment required a physicality and a male performance that I wasn't used to, and a will to follow without question. In the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, Lord Macpherson uses the term canteen culture to describe London Metropolitan Police Service. A second source of institutional racism is our culture, he says, our culture within the police service. Much has been said about our culture, the canteen culture, the occupational culture. How and why does this impact the impact on individuals, black individuals on the street? Well, we would say the occupational culture within the police service, given the fact that the majority of police officers are white, tends to be the white experience, the white beliefs, the white values. What was challenging is that I had gone on to a further education college following a private school experience where I was motivated to lead with intellect, emotion, and feeling. And in the very early 2000s, I played cricket, and I was taught by my dad and my school teacher, Mr. Hayward, to play chess, where I in fact played in many chess tournaments. I remember going to the National Youth Chess Congress at Loughborough Grammar School a few times, and that was my idea of fun when I was growing up. And we also went to London, we went to Birmingham, and we went to Manchester as well, I believe. And we had a little community. We were just all geeks, basically, nerds. And my parents sent me to that school because they believed I would do better socially and emotionally, having what today may be described within today's debates of neurodivergence in the way I learn. So from when I was little, my mum understood that I was different to the other children, and I'd probably never truly belong as well. And when I was small, I'd ask my parents deep questions like, why is fire hot? Or about the meaning of life. And during the 1990s, traits like this, along with things like sensory difficulties and also being situationally mute, led to my mum pursuing an autism diagnosis in 1998 when she was turned away from what became CAMS, stereotyped as an angry black woman, and mum was put off by neuroscience as a way to help, and also then redirected to philosophy with this book called The Indigo Children by Jan Tober and Lee Carroll. And the indigo child concept came from the New Age movement of the 70s. about spirituality of self, personal growth, holistic well-being, and connections to the universe. In 1998, Mum and Dad were undergraduate students looking for help, and the Indigo Child book argued there were children in the world who mainstream society saw as strange, but by today's standards, with many meeting the requirements for autism, ADHD, and other neurotypes. And that book is not grounded in peer-reviewed research, but it helped Mum, and when she was a young woman, well, there was a later book by Beth Singler in 2018. In 2018, and for some, Indigo Child became a way to reinterpret autism and ADHD away from medical science. And she found that book in a time of apparent crisis. And these children were labelled as rebellious in a world run on control, discipline, punishment, and routine. But when they encounter something that delights them, they are occupied for hours. And this is what happened to me when I not only found things like poetry, but also Disney and also the world of science fiction and also alternative rock bands like the Gorillaz. And it's through popular culture I learned to speak, and this was part of my socialization in the world. I use these texts to make sense, and I still do, which is also how I found spaces like queer theory as well. So born in 1995, I'm a noughties kid. We used to go to Blockbuster on a Friday night to rent films, and this is how I got into Disney and also things like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films. And this is what I loved as a child, as well as the X-Men, the animated series as well. So the first CD I owned was a single called Clint Eastwood by the Gorillaz, and even now it still feels to enjoy this stuff as a black man is to be seen as alternative. I'm not big on today's black music, sports, and I don't fit into many boxes expected of me. In the early 2000s, physical media offered me a space that I now understand to be film theory, and that gave me an escape. And for me, I got a lot of alternative education, especially about films, from the extra content I found on DVDs, so commentaries, special features, bloopers. As an autistic child, I loved the extra lore, the extra information to be found on the bonus discs of things like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the extended edition when that came out. Well, Disney films also offered a makings of section. So black, autistic, and male, there were very few spaces I could really talk about the things that I enjoyed, other than to women and girls who were going to ask me the big questions or to offer the big questions. My enjoyment of Disney soundtracks led to criticisms of being soft, and I grew up watching old films with my grandmother, like The Wizard of Oz, which then got me into film and cinema as well. So beyond schooling, I had a cultural education of Caribbean music, but also another cultural education in the very white Western music and filmmaking canon as well. So to black men, I never felt I quite belonged anywhere, because I was seen as too white or too feminine, and I wasn't really interested in black British subculture of sports, including football. But I did like cricket because I was brought up with elders as well. So growing up in the Shires, going to school in a village, lots of my childhood socially was spent at friends' houses and on rural cricket pitches. I've little resonance with the types of black masculinities that show up in our media. So the hyper-masculine strongness built by lives in the inner city. The countryside synthesized my already quiet demeanor, although I also had to fight because of racism. Barry Jenkins's Moonlight was a watershed moment as well for me, because it was about black men who explored the feminine too. Yes, they were gay black men, but that is really one theme of several themes. And although I'm not a gay man, I did start thinking about queerness in how I show up and the way autism impacted my masculinity is received. So for black men, nerdiness clashes with patriarchal expectations of toughness, and hyperfocus is only tolerated if it serves something greater like politics or money or even performing your masculinity. I'd argue that it tends to have to be agreed upon by other men. So what passes for masculinity then is more of like a homoerotic voyeurism. It can lead to an overperforming of confidence, public intellectualizing, hiding vulnerability, with little space to be shy, romantic, or even emotionally confused as well. So black male nerds do exist in Britain, but they are usually codified differently and very rarely allowed to embrace their nerdcore outright. Munya Chawawa has to cipher his nerdiness through being funny, but is a politics nerd. Akala is treated as the exception, not the rule. And then Richard Ayoade has had has made a career out of his nerdiness, but tends to have to be some degree of funny to do so. But it does feel that if you're black in the public eye, you have to justify it through other legitimacies, like comedy, sport, or music. And obviously, like all those examples are also mixed black men. So there's that to consider too. And talking to the Jamaican sound men, for example, for my PhD, I realized how nerdy they are about tech, but it's mediated through music. So black men can be highly smart, but not awkwardly obsessed, which is very different to the United States. I found this doing a PhD, which requires high levels of hyperfocus. People like the idea of a PhD, but the personality it takes to do one is often one of social aloofness that is less accepted in aesthetics of black British men who are required to be in a social coolness. We may code switch our interests, downplay academic enjoyment, and perform coolness to survive socially. I played in national chess tournaments as a child, but I know my working class peers could not lead with that due to class and patriarchy. By the time I got to university, I was working class, but I saw this closer of not leading with nerdy enjoyment during my BA. So I did a creative writing BA. Black men weren't on these courses. I was afforded space to be myself due to class freedoms, including my degree. Working class people do these things, but the road is less straight for them as well. So before I found my blackness, I found Marvel, Pokemon, the Gorillas, and other forms of escape into galaxies. There was no Black Britain reflecting my interests, and little media that showed me black men that weren't performing patriarchy to fit in. And in these popular cultural texts, I could be autistic without necessarily having to hide. And for me, whose divergences was made queer by environment, difference was treated as a threat. As a child, like many of my autistic and queer colleagues, we gathered around storytelling. Belonging came from the imagined. Star Wars continues to be more affirming for me than Top Boy, and the X-Men is a better reflection of who I am than many black British films and TV shows. Fandom was a refuge, cartoons were my home, and Marvel's mutants maketh the man. Thanks very much for listening. And as always, with these sorts of videos, if you've got any comments, leave them in the comment section, or you can email me at treyventour.com/contact.